Good evening, everybody. Thanks for attending our second meetup. Today, we're going to be getting into something a little bit more complex than we had on our last session. So if you're in our last session, we know we're talking about recurring revenue tracking and the various ways you can do that in HubSpot. Today, we're talking about quite an exciting topic that often comes up in projects we do at HubSpot, which is planning automations. So before we get started, I'll just introduce myself again. I'm James. I'm one of the co-founders of HubSpot, and we are a agency that basically revolves around the HubSpot CRM and the CMS and all the different features and tools that it has. So we basically work as experts to help different companies make more out of HubSpot. And the reason that we're doing this series of meetups is to sort of share different ideas around the kind of challenges you have with your CRM when you're using HubSpot and the ways that we as a team have tried to solve those, and hear from you guys about some kind of similar use cases you've had and how you've drawn conclusions, so we can all learn from each other's own experiences and our own problem solving. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Scott, the other co-founder of HubSpot, who's going to be showing you the stages of planning and automation. And then after that, I'm going to basically take his plan and create a live automation on the call to follow that plan. So over to you, Scott.
Great, thanks, James, for that quick introduction. So let's start by sharing my screen. So there's and go through what that kind of involves. So just bear with me 1 minute. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
So just a quick introduction. What we have here is called a BPMN diagram. A BPMN is a business process model which illustrates how information flows through a process. You'll see this done in a few ways. You might see this done with what they call swim lanes, or you might see it done this way, which is about representing the process automation part of the system. So why we use this diagram, this was developed by IBM and Oracle, and a whole bunch of other companies came together to build this standard. And it's a very strong representation of the information flow. But what we like about it is that from a starting point, from a client, we're really able to capture how information is going to flow from the beginning to the end. And for every client, that can be different. So for some clients, that could be from the point of lead generation all the way to retention, going through the onboarding, the retention, the lead nurturing, and that might involve a whole bunch of different systems that are in there. But what is good about this diagram system, is that we're really able to represent where HubSpot starts and where HubSpot ends. So we're trying to not only show the interactions within HubSpot, but how HubSpot is interacting with other systems. So to begin with, it's worth mentioning that this is a workflow which actually can execute. And as I said, we start with this as a planning phase with communicating how the workflow automation is going to work. And then we pull it apart into HubSpot's ownership of it, and then other parts of the system. So other parts of the system may be just plugins, just connectors. But when it gets into very complex integration, we can take this diagram, pull out the HubSpot part, and then use the certain aspects when we're talking to different systems. So if that you're involving maybe 4 or 5 systems, distribution, onboarding, a different CRM, financial, we're able to plug all those in and act as the glue between HubSpot and the other systems here. So this is only used when it gets into complex systems. So normally we use it as a representative diagram, and then later, if we do get into complex scenarios, then we can represent it as a orchestration across multiple systems. So that is how we use this diagram, and that's when we'd use it in different cases. So just to get started, I put together an example here, and the example is to illustrate some very common business items that you're going to see, business issues, business practices that you're going to see. So I've created a request for a financial quote. So the idea here is someone's come in, they filled out a form, request for a quote, and they've hit this submit button. So the first thing we're doing here is saving the details of that quote, and we're going to perform what we call is start this process. So the idea is that we're containing the steps within a process. So in our example here, first thing we're doing is going to do a soft credit pull. So we're going to check the customer's financial situation. Once we've done it, we're asking for a user task. So assigning it to an underwriter or whatever role you have to create a user task. So the first thing here is you'll notice this little clock here with this little dotted line. This is called a non-interrupting event. So what this is saying is that we're going to wait 1 day for that person to create an event, an estimate, sorry. And then if they haven't created in 1 day, we're going to raise it to their manager to see why that quote wasn't created. So if you have standards like a 4-hour quote timing or something like that, and maybe the person's away or they're not at their desk or they're busy with other work, this is allowing the escalation to go up to a manager to help take control or do whatever they need to do to make sure that quote does get completed. So this is our first concept here, this escalation. After they finish the quote, we have what we call a service task. The service task is, in this case, is just sending an email to the customer with an initial quote. So let's call this a soft quote or a draft quote. Now we have what we call an event gateway. So basically we're waiting for the possibility of 2 things to happen. We're waiting for the client to either confirm that they're happy with that quote or 5 days happen. So in this scenario, if 5 days happen and they haven't confirmed the quote, we're going to set the quote to cancelled. So it has an expiry period. So, you've done your soft credit pull. You say the maximum time for that to happen is 5 days. If not, it's going to get cancelled. And we also have here where they accept the quote, we're simply setting the status about that quote to accepted. So this is our second common business paradigm that happens a lot, where you need 2 scenarios to handle to get through the process. Once we've completed that, the system simply continues on, emailing a cancellation or emailing the customer update. In this case, we've just put a sub-process here because we don't want to get too complex in this conversation, perform underwriting, and then send a final quote. And that's the end of the process. So what's going on at the bottom here? So you notice that all this process is getting that original quote. And we provide 2 options here. So we provide a concept of an event, which in this case, a customer can do an event saying, cancel my quote. So if this event happens, it doesn't matter where it is in this process, it's going to go down here, it's going to delete their details and end. So any tasks or any actions that we're waiting here are then terminated, and it follows down and deletes the details and ends the process. And the next item we have here is 15 days. So for whatever reason, if something's been delayed here or something's not happening, most likely the person never got the estimate we're saying after 15 days for good practices, we just want to cancel that. So all those, any possible user tasks or events waiting are completed. So 15 days to finish this process. If not, delete the details and move on. So maybe the quote, the request was spam, or we're never able to get a credit pull, or whatever the situation was. After 15 days, we give up, delete the data, clean out the system, so the core human activities can focus on what they need to do. And so this process itself is quite simple, but as I said, what it's illustrating here is the concept of escalation, the concept of event-driven versus time-driven decisions that need to be made. And here it's what we call a cancellation process. So we're cancellating either based on an event or a time, which is going to delete the details. Just for some symbols, so you understand, the cross here just means a decision. So when it executes, we're either going this path or this path. There are other symbols such as parallel and other activities here, but we're not going to get into that in this conversation. So we won't get into more complexity than what we have in this diagram. So now we start with this, as you can see, like if we're working with a client, interacting with a client, this is a great way to visualize, even though they may not know all the symbols, but it allows them to visualize and discuss it. It's much easier than a documentation or SOP to be able to see and understand this flow. And with good comments as well, we're really able to describe in a visual way how that's going to work. So if you put yourself in the world of HubSpot, when you're starting that project, if you can really visualize this workflow at the top, it's going to really assist in making decisions before a company or yourself spend a lot of effort doing those workflows up front and trying to change them. So we break it down like this. Another activity we might do is annotate, which means just adding comments to say, this section is going to be, this will be a HubSpot workflow, or this is going to be a plugin, or it's going to be a custom code just to do it. And the person here might be an underwriter. So we can add some extra comments just to assist in making sure that here is the master of the representation and how that's going to be broken down into HubSpot. So leaving it at that point, I'm going to hand this over to James to explain how he'll take this diagram, analyze it, and then put it into HubSpot and break it down into even more details.
Cool, thanks, Scott. So let me switch over to my screen, and I'm going to show my whole screen here because I want to show you basically the diagram and HubSpot next to each other so that it's easy for you to see like what I'm referencing as we're sort of going across from interpretation into execution. So in this diagram, we can see various things we need to basically pull across into HubSpot. The start point of it would be like the workflow trigger. We've then got where you've got the different cog logo in the corner. That means there's some kind of automated action. So that would be there's action that needs to happen in the workflow. You have the concept of delays in a HubSpot workflow, which we can cater for with the time delays. We've got decisions as well, which can be covered by if then and value equals branches. And we also got user tasks for when we're creating just normal tasks and assigning them to a user. But the big thing that's really different between looking at this diagram and looking at HubSpot is that here everything is continuous. It's an entire diagram that shows the whole picture of the process from start to finish, including different sub-processes, which are shown in the same diagram and all interconnected. With HubSpot, it doesn't work like that. With HubSpot, as you know, you can have a lot of different workflows. And part of the reason you end up with so many workflows is just because you can't realistically have all of this within a single workflow. There's too many different things leading into other different things. And if you try and stuff them all into a single workflow, then it's just going to become spaghetti, because it just won't look anywhere near as clean as this. There'll be too many arrows pointing in different ways. And that's why a normal good practice when you are taking a process like this and putting it into HubSpot is to break this down into separate constituent components. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing within the build out that I'm about to do for you. So before we'd had this demo today, I've basically gone through and created a few things in advance to save a bit of time for us now. So that includes creating a few different contact properties here. These are the different contact properties I'll be using at different points within these workflows. I've also created a set of very simple automated marketing emails, which you'll see are dotted around at different points within this flow, so that as I build this, we'll be able to set these different properties at the right times, make decisions based on the values, and also use the values in these fields and the presence of values if they need to be manually added to trigger the next steps of the process, and pulling those through into the emails as well, so that certain information from here gets used to personalize customer experience. So let's start with sort of the main workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be very neat and put these all within one folder. So I'm in automation under the workflows tool, and let's create a folder, and we'll call this the quoting and underwriting process. And then let's go and create a workflow from scratch. So everything we've got here is all being handled within the contact. I know that because it's all starting from the request for quote. We haven't got anything in here about creation of a deal, although in normal sales situations, we would create a deal and have things handled under a deal. We've just sort of kept this simple and kept everything under a single object, which is the contact. However, you see when you're creating different types of workflow, you're able to create workflows with all different types of trigger based on different objects and different sets of data within the system. So that gives you sort of the flexibility of centering different stages of your process around different types of record and different types of event that may fall within this process. And that again is another reason why you would break it down. Like you may have a contact workflow at the start that is being triggered off of this form, the request to quote form, and then you might have something later that's being triggered off the back of a deal reaching the next stage, and you want that to be centered around that particular deal. So let's start with creating our main contact-based workflow. And let's call this the request to quote main. So the first thing I would do would be to set my trigger, which is conveniently for me at the top of the diagram. So that is completion of the request to quote form. And I have pre-created a request to quote form. So I can just go in under form submissions and set completion of this form as the trigger for the workflow. If I want this process to run each and every time there's a new submission, like if someone requests a quote in the future, then I could potentially set re-enrollment for this flow as well. Then once I've got the initial trigger in there, then I can look at what happens next in this first sub-process. So the details are being saved. Naturally, HubSpot, because someone's filled out a form, it's going to save that information onto a contact. So if I go through onto the form that I created earlier, and I fill out this information, is going to then put a form submission through and create a contact for me if I don't have one. The next thing I'm going to do is to add in a date stamp of when this form was filled out, when the quote was requested. The reason I'm doing that is down to this part of the sub process, because I want to basically track 15 days after that request to quote. And if this part of the process is still in action, I want to cancel it and everything within it. So that's why I'm having this in here. So let's just do a setting of a property. And I'm setting this property here, quote request date. And I'll set that to date of step because I want that date to be set to the same date as the quote was requested. I'm then going to be pulling a soft credit pool. And that soft pull isn't going to be happening from within HubSpot. That'll be happening from a third-party system. So HubSpot does integrate with a lot of other third-party systems. You can get to them from the connect an app tab over here. And you can even see sort of our Create Notes plugin via here as well. So there may be something already in here for your use case. Like we've got ones for adding data from a Google Sheet. We've got ones for sending SMSs, creating records in other systems. So those are all available. But if it's not, then we also maybe look at doing a custom integration between HubSpot workflow and the third-party system. So if a client of ours requested something like that, we'd basically either trigger a webhook that is going to post some data to another address, or we might do a custom code snippet as a workflow action, which gives us a bit more control over the data that is being sent and more flexibility on what we get back off of that. I'm just going to create sort of a fake webhook here. So let's say that I'm going to send the all the information that has been included on the initial form. Which was just these four properties here. Okay, so once that has then happened, if that's all good, then we'd be looking at doing the next user task, which would be to create a quote estimation. So now we can create a task and assign it to a user. So let's just call that create quote estimation. I'll put that as due immediately and assign it to me. So after that soft pull, we're then going to ask me to create a quote. And now we're going to be waiting to see if I actually go ahead and do that. And that's where we can get even more clever because we can now do an event-based delay. So you'll see we're waiting a day for me to go and send that quote to the customer or to prepare to send that quote to the customer. So let's do a delay. And this delay will be based on the output of an earlier action, which in this case is me marking this particular task as complete. So now I'm doing task status is complete. I can now choose a delay period and I'm allowing myself a delay of 1 day. And then I'm going to see whether I've actually taken that positive action. So it's waiting a day. And if during that day, that event criteria, i.e. me completing the task is completed, then we'll go down the event criteria met path. If after a day has expired, I haven't done anything, then we'll go down the event criteria not met path. So that not met path would then be the escalation we have here where we're creating another task. Let's say we create this one for Scott to follow up to me about why the hell I haven't sent a estimation to this person. And we'll set that as high priority because something has been missed. After that, we can then wait and see until an event happens, or we can wait basically and see if I get it done within the 15 days overall time. So I'll now do another delay, which will be based on the same original task because Scott's task is to make sure that I do my task because I haven't done it in time. So if I select my task again, we're basically going to go into another pause now to wait and see if I complete my task. And to get our full total of 15 days, I'm going to set that as a 14-day pause. And if the event criteria is met, i.e. I do complete that task, we can return to the positive path here. And the next step that's happening on the positive path is to wait and see, or basically to go and send a quote to me. So we can send quotes obviously via a automated email if we want, via WhatsApp, SMS, whatever channel we want to send. In this case, I put together a basic marketing email here, which includes a link to the quote as pulled from the quote link field here on the contact card. So this is where I would add the quote link after I have gone through the process of creating my quote estimation. And I need to close the loop here with go to other action, which means that if after Scott pushes me for not doing the task in time, actually go about doing that, then it will go back to the main path and send that quote. After that, we then need to go basically and wait to see if the person actually is responsive to that quote and whether they actually accept that quote or not. So in the email that I created, the very basic email, I've got a link to the quote. This is just a placeholder. It would put in the token URL of the quote that I've added into my custom field here. But it's then got a CTA button, a HubSpot CTA button. So as you may already know, in HubSpot, when you have CTA buttons that you create through the CTA tool, which you can get to from marketing, lead capture, and CTAs, those are trackable buttons. So if you send that to someone in a marketing email and they click on it, you can use that as a behavior event trigger to trigger the next stage of the process. So let's go and go over to here to clicking a link. So I'm going to choose, here is your quote, say that I've clicked a link in this email. So if I just have one link in my email, which in this case I do, then I could just basically have an event-based delay here that is going to wait and see whether I basically go and click on that CTA. So here I'm doing like a 5-day wait. And if during those 5 days I go and click on that link, then I'm going to set the status of this quote to accepted. And you'll see that I've already created a field here for quote status with accepted, declined, and cancelled. So I can auto set that to accepted. But if after 5 days I haven't accepted the quote, then I can go and put that in as cancelled. So here's quite a good place to break the workflow because, break out the workflow, I should say, into another stage. We've already got quite a bit in here, not as big as some spaghetti that we've sometimes seen set up on people's portals, but it's probably enough that you can manageably see what this workflow is doing up to this point. So before I go off of this, I'm just going to sort of cover the cancellation event here. So if after 15 days nothing has happened, then I'm going to basically delete this contact and therefore clear all of the data. So that sort of ends this whole process. So that is my sort of workflow number 1 here. But then I also need to do sort of a catch-all as well for this cancellation, because that's only if it's cancelled during this stage. There's also the possibility of it getting cancelled during this stage, or the possibility that something goes wrong here and then it doesn't end for whatever reason. So I am going to do let's call it like a master cancellation. So for this one, I'll have two different triggers on this. So the first one would be that the request request date, that is more than 15 days ago. And then crucially, that I am still enrolled in the main workflow. So what I'm saying with this one is that during this main workflow, it's being triggered from the form, stuff is happening within this whole sub process here. And if any point during, if this sort of gets stuck within that workflow, like it just is not going to terminate there and 15 days have passed, it's still in the workflow, it's going to clear out the trash. So it's still in the workflow, more than 15 days have passed since the form submission. So I'm then going to go and delete the contact. So then now we've got those in place, we can look at the things that happen after this sub process. So we've already either set the status of the quote request to cancelled or accepted. And in fact, I just realized I missed one step there, that accepted email. So let's go and add that back in. I think we intended really for that to be a internal email. So we could do like an internal email action here. If I can find it, there it is. Have that go to the contact owner. And we can have this as customer accepted quote. So now I've got all of this box covered and everything off of it. We can now go and look at what happens after the status is set. So we've got when the status is accepted or cancelled, we're then going to either do a cancellation or we're going to go through the process of finalizing that quote. So let's go back to the folder. Now we're going to create a quote which is going to be triggered off of the last actions or in the last workflow. So let's call this one 2.0 quote status set. And as I start building these out, I tend to number these as well, because it just makes it easier to follow how they work in HubSpot. Obviously in the diagram, everything here is progressive, but when it comes to what you call in HubSpot, because it's so fragmented into different workflows, it can be better just to number everything, and then you can just sort it in order and see how these sort of go in terms of the actual flow of the different processes into other processes. And if I do sort of 1.0, 1.1, 1.01, I can start inserting stuff in the middle when things come up that need to be added to the process later, without renumbering everything. So next thing I'll do, quote status is any of accepted or cancelled, because we've got nothing defined for anything that would happen if the quote's declined. So because the customer is sort of declining the quote and there's no further action really needed there. So Now I can have a value equals branch if just because I'm looking at only one field here. But if I had multiple different varying criteria, I could do an if then branch so that I can factor in more than just what we see here, like several options in the same drop down. So for this, nice and simple, I create a value equals branch with options for accepted and cancelled. If someone cancels, I'll just send them the cancellation email. And if someone accepts, then I am going to start by sending them the finalizing email. I'm then going to go into the underwriting process. So we haven't really defined in this diagram what underwriting is going to be, because that's going to be a whole complicated thing in itself, and we don't want to be here all day on that. So let's just create a blank workflow for the underwriting process. And let's put something in here so I can switch it on. So now if I go back here, I can have this enroll the contact into the underwriting process. So that underwriting process can then take place. And then after that underwriting process has been completed, I can then go ahead and send an email with the final quote. So let's sort of recap on everything we've just gone through and look at these things against the diagram, so you can see how this sort of flows into itself. So starting from the top, so we have the point where the person fills out a form to request a quote, and then saying a date stamp about when that happened so that we can take them out later if they don't continue. We are then doing the soft pull, which is referencing another software. When that soft pull has been completed, we are creating a quote for estimation. We're then waiting to see if that quote estimation is done. And if and when it is, we're sending the quote to the customer. If it's not happening within a day, we're creating an escalation task and waiting for, again, to see if that actually happens before continuing back onto this path. We're then waiting to see if they click the accept link in the email. And if they don't, we're canceling after 5 days. If they do, we're setting the status as accepted and notifying the owner that the customer has accepted the quote. If after 15 days they are still within this whole workflow, and the 15 days have passed since the original date stamp, we are then removing the contact from the database and terminating everything, including closing off the tasks, because we're deleting their contact. And then if it reaches a status, cancelled or accepted, we're then either sending a cancellation email or sending a finalizing price email and kicking off the underwriting process, which after it's completed will then lead to a final quote being sent. So as you can see, all of this detail can be sort of broken down and built into workflows with actions. The majority of that is happening within HubSpot itself. Some of it will happen with external systems through plugins and automations and custom integrations. But the majority of it is actually stuff that you can build directly in HubSpot, just using the standard workflow options that are available to you. There are a couple of things in here that you just need to sort of know about workflows, just to make sure that everything works. Like for instance, we're sending marketing emails in this workflow, which means that if each and every one of these, I am probably going to want to set the marketing contact status. I don't think I'll be able to do that here because we're in a demo portal, but you need to make sure that setting the marketing contact status to marketing contact is done before you send any emails within a flow. And likewise, if someone cancels and you don't want to include them towards your quota of marketing contacts, you might want to then have another action at the end, sort of termination points, which would be like here, basically, where you set them as a non-marketing contact. And that may be an alternative as well to deleting their contact. If you want to retain the data, but you don't want to have them in the flow anymore, you might want to change them to non-marketing and just keep them in the database. And aside from that, it's just knowing what kind of things you can do with delays and making sure that you factor that in. And when it comes to using event delays, there's quite a bit you can do, as you can see, to keep things within the same flow. But at some points, you've just got to say, okay, here's a good point to split. Let's take the next outcome and put it into another workflow. So that pretty much covers everything that we've got here. Obviously, I didn't go into really anything in the soft pull there. We've just got webhook in here. You can sort of take data from when you do one of these submissions. So, for instance, where is it? Oh yeah, here we are. So under action output, send a webhook. I can get like a status back, or the failure or success state, or the response message from the server. So that would be the contents of the response on that webhook. And I can then save that into a contact property. So I could basically have a branch here where if that response comes back as pass, I go to create quote estimation. If it comes back as fail, then I could have it where it removes the contact. And if it comes back as manual query, then it could create another task to do a manual check before you go on to create an estimation. So when you're pulling in data from other systems using webhooks or custom code in the Ops Hub Pro or the enterprise versions of HubSpot, then you can then use that data directly to make decisions within HubSpot and to trigger the next actions within the CRM itself. So that's sort of more clever things you can do within here. So I know that was a lot of information we've gone through. Hopefully that all made sense and you were sort of following visually how we were going from this diagram up to a HubSpot setup. And yes, Scott, have you had anything in the chat while I was going through that?
Yeah, we got a couple of questions. So the first one was, what happens when you delete the contact to the workflow? So I think it's asking, is the workflow canceled, or what happens when that occurs?
So when you delete, is literally deleting the entire record from HubSpot. So this is quite a new workflow action that has been requested a lot by HubSpot users. It just lets you remove junk records from the system. It's quite useful in particular for like when you, well, if you got some quality assurance checks to see whether someone's qualified and they're not spam, and then auto deleting the spam. But you can use that here as well. It depends whether you want to keep a historic record of people that just don't go anywhere. And if you don't, then want to keep it, then great, just use this. If you do want to keep that, then just like sort of terminate the workflow. So like rather than doing a delete here, if I look in the settings, there's unenrollment and suppression. So you can do remove from specific workflows. So I could have it where if the master cancellation basically just takes them out of workflow 1.0, as opposed to just completely deleting the contact and removing all history of them existing. So different options.
Got it. Next question is, with the global cancel quote, would that work the same way as the timed 15-day timer?
I'm not quite sure I understand what were you taking from that?
I believe they're taking the at the bottom there where we have the 15 days and where the customer can cancel the quote manually. in the bottom of the BPMN diagram.
Ah,
So
I see. Yes. So yeah, if they cancel the quote manually, how do we best portray that? So
need get a CTA or a web page that would have the CTA on it where they would cancel that quote.
we could, yeah, we could add another CTA, and I was kind of playing with this a little bit earlier actually, before we demo today. So if I go back into my very basic marketing email, and then another CTA button here, which is decline. Let's try that again. Getting a bit swirly there. So we had our accept and decline quote buttons. We were to take that decline as being the customer canceling the quote. Then we could have that as another set of criteria here. So this is where we'd have to add an or to it. So rather than it just timing out after 15 days, we look at call to actions. And then when the decline call to action is clicked, then that in turn will also either take them out of the other workflow if that's all we want, or we have a follow-up action to delete them entirely.
Okay. The next one is the user task. Do they have to be a specific person or can they be a team?
Yes, so they can be a team. You just need to assign a team member for that situation. So you can have multiple different ownership properties within HubSpot. Like obviously by default, you're going to have your contact owner. That's who the overall owner is of a contact. Same with company owner, deal owner, ticket owner, etc. But you can also create other fields for other types of owner, for different. That's going to basically the people that can complete different roles within the process. So if I was to do, let's say, manager, and create that as a HubSpot user property, then what I would do here is I would basically have to create a couple of teams, like a sales team and a, in this case, a manager's team. So let's create a sales team, add myself to it. We add a couple of other people, and then we'll do a manager's team. And I'll put this team sort of under you, under the managers, so it makes sense. So then what I can do is basically rotate ownership of a record prior to creating a task. So what I would do here, first of all, is do a rotate based on a team. And I am doing a rotation of the contact owner initially, because that'll be the salesperson. So I'll rotate that ownership across team members. And then I would change this task so that it's going to assign it to an existing owner of a contact, which would be the contact owner, the salesperson. And then that could be repeated for other owners of the record. So if there is a need to escalate this particular contact because the person who's in the sales team who's taken ownership of it hasn't taken action within a day, then I can assign a manager as the sort of manager owner of it. So I'll assign a member of the manager's team to the manager property. So that's a separate property from contact owner I've just created. So now the salesperson is still assigned as a owner of the contact, and the manager is assigned as the oversight owner of the contact. And then when it comes to their task, I can then have it where it assigns the manager owner the follow-up task in the same way that I've assigned the original contact owner, the salesperson, to the initial task of creating the quote.
Excellent. So another one here is, can you use the quote object in these workflows?
Yeah, you can. So these are all the objects that are basically available. So you've got your basic data ones for your basic types of record. And then, yeah, you've got the quote in there for triggering off of a quote status. You can trigger off of incoming inbox or chat bots, people filling out feedback forms, people opening subscriptions if you're making payments, if you're using HubSpot payments, currently only in the US. And also invoice-based or goal-based. This is sort of around marketing goals and triggering a workflow off of marketing goals being reached. So when it comes to a quote-based one, your normal triggers would be off of, on the quote object, things like payment status, becoming paid, or I think it's quote approval status, becoming approved. So when you get e-sign of one of those quotes, or when the HubSpot payment has been made through Stripe or HubSpot payments on that quote, you can then go and trigger pretty much all your normal HubSpot contact actions. So like sending a thank you mail to that contact, or moving the deal that was associated to that contact into closed one and notifying the manager that someone's made a sale, that kind of thing. That's all possible from a quote-based trigger.
All right. There's another one here. What is the dotted line versus the non-dotted line around the clock? All right, I can answer that one.
Oh yeah.
So the different types of tasks here is one is called non-interrupting, which means the task will still exist, credit quote estimation, but also the task will exist in two. So there's two parallel activities happening, where the solid clock that you're seeing at the bottom means that it's called interrupting, which means it force everything to stop and follow that path. So that's the difference there in terms of the control flow. Let me see anything else. Last question is, can you use custom objects in addition in this workflow?
Yes, you can. Yeah. And I haven't got any custom objects on this demo portal. That's the only reason I'm not seeing it. But if I did have one, then it would just appear underneath the main 4 standard ones, or I think actually no, right at the bottom maybe, so that you can just trigger off of those. And that'd work exactly the same as one of these top 4, like based on any properties that you've created on that custom object can then be used as enrollment triggers alongside any properties or values on records associated to that custom object. That's all possible.
Right, that's all the questions we have for now.
Nice one. Well, thanks everyone for hanging on with that one. I know that was intense. There's a lot of like meaty things we've covered in the session today, but there was some really good questions, I must say. Like, thanks everyone for contributing on that. And if there's anything else that you're wondering, feel free to drop us a line, hello@hubstart.io. If you have any questions or you need any help with building out workflows of different complexities, it's the kind of stuff we really enjoy doing. So love to hear from you if that's something you want to talk about or to show us or want a bit of help with. So yeah, thanks very much, everybody, and we will see you on the next one.
All right, thanks everyone. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.